This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, serial killer, the Kermit Gosnell story. With us this evening, Anne McElhinney, an award-winning journalist, filmmaker, public speaker, and podcaster. Her new 6-part episode series on serial killer Kermit Gosnell is on serialkillerpod.com. Anne, what an honor and privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Jimmy.
So much to talk to you about. I've been watching this 6-part series, just fascinating. There's a couple other words we can use like horrifying, sobering. Your movie was excellent also on this topic. So look, why don't we just start right at it? What inspired you to make this series and also make the movie on Gosnell?
Well, it's an extraordinary story, as you say. And at the time when Kermit Gosnell was facing, multiple counts of murder of babies and of injuring women, the media basically ignored the story. And we have a charity here, and our work is to tell the stories that other journalists don't want to tell. And this story, in every possible way, is newsworthy. And so we're telling the story, and we're going to keep telling it, because as long as there's people who haven't heard it, I think it's really worth repeating. As you say, we made a movie, and now we have this 6-part podcast, which people can listen to for free at serialkillerpod.com. And it goes into the details. And I think what's really good about the podcast is we speak to the detectives, we speak to the prosecutors, we interview people who were in the clinic, who witnessed these awful events. And most extraordinarily, we speak for hours and hours with Kermit Gosnell himself, who is in prison serving 3 life sentences for what he did.
Fascinating series, Anne, and I want to get into the psychology of this monster, because as your series shows, while you're talking to him, he's trying to tell you about his poetry and using all this strange obfuscation on everything. A real narcissist, if that's just one description we can use.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a very good one. Yeah. I mean, he's very self-obsessed. He talks about his feet all the time. I've been in prison. I've talked to him in prison. And he has the demeanor of someone who's just played golf. I mean, he's got this very relaxed demeanor. This isn't the demeanor of someone who's, an innocent man who's in prison for countless numbers of murders. He's super relaxed, disappointed he didn't get into the poetry class. And this is a man, I mean, let's remind people maybe who are listening who don't know, this is a man whose who operated an abortion clinic in Philadelphia for decades, for like over 30 years. And whose modus operandi was to fill women up with a thing called cytotec, which made them dilate. The babies fell out at any stage in their pregnancy, right up to 9 months. And then he lifted them alive, he or the people who worked there, and cut their necks with scissors. And he trained the people who worked there to do the same. And none of them were nurses. These were women who, according to the detective, Jim Wood, said, you wouldn't let them mow your lawn, never mind be involved in any kind of medical procedures. And these nurses, so-called pseudo nurses, were given anesthesia. They were giving anesthesia to women. And in the case of 2 women died in the clinic. One, an African-American mother, Samika Shaw, and then a Bhutanese refugee who had lived in a refugee camp in Nepal for 20 years, was in America for 4 months before she ended up dead because of Gosnell. So this is an incredible story in every kind of way. It's newsworthy, and it wasn't covered because of the issue of abortion, which is a sacred cow to progressives, and they will do anything to protect that sacrament almost of the progressive movement, to the extent that they didn't want to cover this story. And there's covering and covering. You'd hear the New York Times saying, oh, we covered it. The Washington Post, we covered it. They did when they were bullied into covering it. And when they did cover it, it was cursory. And when they want to cover something like George Floyd or like, Michael Brown, those stories, which were, you could say were local news stories, but everyone on the planet Earth knows who those two men are. But not everyone knows who Samika Shaw was, an African-American mother who was murdered at Gosnell's clinic. And people don't know about that. So that's why we continue to tell this story and why it's important.
Well, Anne, I'm not going to hold my breath for Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon or Anderson Cooper to invite you on to talk about this. But you're talking about it. So we want to get into the details of this story, but I want to focus in on you for a second, because you're a brave truth teller, and there's very few of people like you on our planet. What made you the person that you are? If I am correct, you are a little bit of a second thoughter, in the sense that you rethought some things. If I'm correct, you were at one time pro-choice. Let me ask you a little bit about your background. What made you become a truth teller and not be like the rest of them?
I started in journalism. I got my start in journalism in Romania. I'm Irish, as you probably gathered. My husband was the Financial Times correspondent in Romania. And I started freelancing as a journalist there, and just any story that I could find, I'd see if I could sell it and, go and interview people. And I started to hear stories and find out things and realize, in many, many cases, that the story that was being reported by the mainstream media wasn't true. And it was really shocking. I mean, I was quite naive in a way, because I kind of thought, oh my God, this is an extraordinary story. Why is this not being reported? And about a lot of things. I mean, one of the biggest stories we ever did that I covered was about a mining company, a Canadian mining company, who was opening a mine in Transylvania. And every news organization on the planet Earth had been there and had reported on this story. And, the story was, evil Canadians destroying the pristine wilderness of Romania. And, you kind of believe it, because everyone's been there, BBC, CNN, New York Times, everyone had been there to this gold mine. So, I was asked to go there, and I just went up there on a train, and everything that they had said about the gold mine was untrue. Everything, just everything. And I'm there going, oh my God, look at me, I'm going to win a Pulitzer Prize here. So obviously I've learned a lot since then. I mean, and just to finish on that story, this was a wonderful Canadian mining company, who were going to do a great thing. They had been gold mining there for 2,000 years. The place was extremely polluted. The Canadians were going to clean the place up. They'd won all kinds of awards. They'd been approved of by the World Bank, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the locals were in favor of them. All the locals wanted it. That mine has never opened. That town is destroyed with poverty. All the young people have had to leave. So I decided, I'm like, oh, wow, which side are you on? And I'm on the side of truth. And I thought, this is a story worth telling. That was a story worth telling. This Gosnell story is certainly a story worth telling. And it continues to be relevant, and extremely relevant, when you think that, we're in a post-Roe world. People are saying, Roe v. Wade has been overturned with the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court. And, people are like, people will say to me, and I've heard it well, Gosnell is an outlier. He's this lunatic. He's an outlier. And my answer to that is, why would you say that? Like, what evidence do you have to suggest that this guy is an outlier? And the reason I say that is because Pennsylvania is very, very progressive. They have amazing laws, extraordinary number of laws. They have an extraordinary, massive bureaucracy with a Department of Health, a Department of State, all kinds of safeguards. And there was complaint after complaint after complaint about this guy for 30 years, including, as I said, 2 women died, and no one did anything. And it gets worse. It gets worse, believe it or not. You've listened to the podcast, so you probably know what I'm going to say. And it comes up in episode 6. But obviously for this podcast, we interviewed, as I said, the detectives, we interviewed the lawyers, the prosecutors, the crime scene detectives, all kinds of people. And we were back in Philadelphia a couple of months ago and interviewing the ADA, Christine Wexler, one of the very important people who put Gosnell away. And we're standing outside of the Gosnell clinic, and she said, hey, look over there. I think the door is open. I think that door is open. Now, she's a law enforcement officer and involved with the law. So she said, look, I'm not going to have anything to do with that, but we're journalists. And the door was open. The door did open, and we walked in. And we walked in through that clinic, which has not changed since basically the day it was closed. And through room and went into Gosnell's office, where he has pornography, where he has photographs, all kinds of stuff. But the most disturbing part of the whole journey through that horrific clinic, which still smells of death, by the way, was in a room not very far away from the street where anyone could have walked in, were file upon file upon file. We estimated about 10,000 files, medical files, of the women who went to that clinic for abortions, with all their personal information, their telephone numbers, their medical examinations. No one from the Department of Health in Pennsylvania gives a damn. So they never bothered to go and pick up those women's personal information. You know, this is very personal information, and they've just left them there. It's just left there. Anyone can walk in and grab that stuff. And that tells you, so that kind of feeds into my theory that if anyone says this guy's an outlier, I have to say, logically speaking, that makes no sense. There obviously are Gosnells in New York, in Illinois, in New Jersey, in California, in these bastions of progressivism, where abortion is so important that they would turn their back on anything to protect it, because we can see it still happening in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. So look, there was an investigation about prescription drugs. That's where this all started. And these drugs were being sold. There was, Jim Wood, I think his name is, he was investigating who was selling these prescription drugs on the street. They finally narrowed in on this Dr. Gosnell character. They come into the clinic, or if that's one way to describe it, and then all of a sudden they find all these bags and bags of dead babies. They find babies' feet in jars in the refrigerator, a whole bunch of horrifying stuff. And then the trial, and then he's convicted. But they ran into a lot of roadblocks because the issue was abortion, as your series shows. I just want to touch on a few of the stranger details, because it's all strange and evil. But
there are so many, and I bet if we talked for 6 hours, I'd forget some. You know, like they walked in, you know, the very first thing that struck them, these vests, as you say, this started out as a kind of a routine drug bust, where Gosnell, you know, along with everything else we know about him now, he was selling prescriptions for opioids. So, you know, there was a big raid. They had the DEA were there. They had the FBI and the local police. And the DA's office, actually, which is where Jim Wood was. And they all, you know, convened, met at night, went in there. And the first thing that hit them all, and these are very, very experienced police officers, the first thing was the smell, which was, they said it was like a wall, the smell of death, this extraordinary smell that they said was what hit them. Then they could see cats walking around, and there were cats walking around in the procedure rooms. On the way in the reception area, there was these large, very large tanks with turtles in them. And the first thing that Gosnell did when he walked in was to say to the cops, well, you know, I need to do something here. I need to feed these turtles. And he gets this bag. He's brought in 2 bags with him, one bag with his teriyaki chicken takeaway. And then in the other bag, he has these clams, which he takes out and crashes together and starts feeding these turtles, while there's like 25 law enforcement officers in the reception area. And he's like doing this. And then he gets a word, you know, the word comes out, oh, there's a woman here who needs an abortion. And he you know, runs off and does this abortion, comes out wearing bloody gloves, and proceeds to eat the teriyaki chicken in front of Jim Wood, and the DEA agent, Steve Doherty, and the FBI agent, Jason Huff. And you know, I've had a lot of very interesting conversations with Jim over the years, and like some of the stuff that we talk about, there's gallows humor in this. But, you know, Jim says to me, and really, honestly, Jason hasn't been able to eat salmon ever since.
Right.
You know, and then as you say, they walked in and they found these jars. I mean, very ghoulish. They found these jar upon jars of babies' feet, you know, that he had cut off and preserved. And the names of the mothers of those children were on the jars, which was, you know, which is another layer of crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing, that sometimes it's crazy, but it kind of makes sense in terms of what kind of people perpetrate this stuff. So the guy that snips live babies' necks but is worried about a turtle, you know, I know a lot of these people. I know people who have screamed at me for being pro-life, and they don't lose one wink of sleep over something like the Gosnell story, but they'll get upset if you step on an ant. There's something very dark and strange about a lot of these individuals. But let me ask this, what was up with the cats? So they're snipping the necks of babies, and a lot of these babies are literally alive and crying and screaming, and he just kills them. What I also find fascinating is, okay, we understand there's one evil monster, but there's actually many human beings surrounding him that are witnessing all of this.
No, absolutely. And people like money, you know, people will do anything for money. And we know that the workers in there got, you know, they got tips. They got like $200 for these late term abortions. So, you know, they could be doing really nice. They could be making, like, some of these people who, as I said, as Jim Wood said, you know, they wouldn't get a job in Target. Like, they wouldn't get a job mowing a lawn, and they were getting like $1,000 a night in tips, you know, for doing all these procedures, you know, which was these killings. It's amazing. No, you're right. I mean, one of the things that, and I wrote the book about this as well. I mean, one of the things that always struck me was it was like Hannah Arendt, who was, you know, who went to the Nuremberg trials and was asked, you know, and wrote that extraordinary book that she wrote about it afterwards. And basically she talked about the banality of evil. And there was something very banal about it, because I know from talking to the witnesses and talking to people that were working in there, people joked. You know, they've hung out and they joked about stuff. There was a young woman there who farted, and they made these jokes. So in the middle of all of this stuff going on, everyone's having a good time. They got all this money. And he wasn't on his own. You know, and as you say, and I love that point you've made there, because it's something that really affects me. I have 2 cats, by the way, which I am kind of irrational about. And I do understand people loving animals. I really get it. And I never really got it as much until I got the cats. And now I'm like, I really get it. And I mean, I've spent ridiculous money on veterinary bills and stuff like that. And I get that, but I can't understand how anyone who cares about little puppies and looks at little puppies or little kittens and gets, as you say, distressed, thinking that anything awful would happen to them, wouldn't be distressed at the death of a baby, and a horrible death of a baby. And one of the things people get to hear, by the way, in the podcast, again, just to remember, is serialkillerpod.com. To go and listen to the 6 episodes. One of the things we did was they didn't allow recordings inside the courtroom, but we have the transcripts of the trial. So we had actors reenact some of the most dramatic moments in the trial. And I think it's important, you know, because, you know, you talked about, like, you know, strange things that happened. I mean, you know, like, for example, Jimmy Johnson was the janitor. And Jimmy Johnson, he's dead now, actually. He died just recently. Jimmy Johnson gave evidence in the trial and was asked, you know, well, what did you do? Like, what kind of work did you do? Well, you know, I was always clearing the toilets. You know, the toilets were blocked. Oh, really? What were the toilets? Tell me about that. What was the toilets blocked with? Well, you know, stuff. Like, what kind of stuff? Well, you know, parts. Well, parts of what? Well, you know, parts of babies, you know, arms and legs. Like, he said that in a courtroom, and the world's journalists didn't think that was worth reporting on. I mean, this is an extraordinary testimony that was happening in an empty courtroom in Pennsylvania. You know, it's like bizarre, in Philadelphia, which is not a backwater. And this is the kind of evidence like that was being heard. Evidence where people were being asked, for example, witnesses were being asked, like, you know, Adrian Moten, for example, asked, did you ever hear baby cry? And she answered that she had heard a baby cry, and that then Gosnell had snipped the neck of that baby. And she had also taken a photograph of baby boy A, who was one of the babies that Gosnell is doing a life sentence for, a baby who shares a birthday with my own father, the 12th of July, who lived and died on that same day, but lived for quite a while and had such an impact on the people that were there that a number of people in the clinic took photographs of him. And those photographs are on the internet, by the way. The photographs of baby boy A are on the internet for you to watch and to look at if you want to, but you don't unsee that forever. And that kind of evidence was day after day. And then I think what's really interesting, I mean, you know, as you say, there's so many interesting things here, but the reason you asked very much earlier on, why did I do this? Why did I, you know, now I've spent years on this story. And the reason that I did this, the absolutely crystal clear reason that I did this was that the jury needed to have it explained to them what a legal abortion was. so that they would know what to be convicting this man of, because abortion is not illegal. Murder is illegal. So they needed to have that really, really broken down and explained to them. And it was. And so they had two very, very experienced abortion doctors come, one of whom came and was asked, just by way of establishing their credentials, how many abortions have you done in your career? And the answer was 40,000. And the jury gasped. The jury made a noise. They made an audible noise with shock. And the judge asked him to repeat it because he got such a shock. The other abortion doctor was asked to describe a second-term abortion. And that's the reason I did. That's the reason I'm here. And that's the reason I've spent years on this, because I then heard that for the first time.
Yeah, and in your work, Anne, you say that in one part, you guys made it 30,000 just so people weren't too overwhelmed, because 40,000 is so hard to believe, yes. But it was 40,000, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
In the movie, we changed it. Yeah. We shaved it we took it down to 30,000 because
just to make it more believable.
We thought people would actually stop watching the movie, that they'd say, well, this is ludicrous. So we actually lied. We reduced the number because it had hit the jury so hard. We knew it would be the same with the movie. And we thought, you know what, we can't do it in the movie. Let's just reduce it.
Right. Well, look, the same obstacles that you faced and are facing with trying to tackle this issue, the same obstacles the people were facing that were trying to bring this monster to trial, because it was told to them, do not make this about abortion. That's a sacred cow. So it's very interesting in our society. If a black person dies in the hands of a white police officer, his life matters. And of course it does. And we understand why, if it was a horrible thing and the white cop is evil. We get all that. Black lives matter. But all of a sudden, David Dorn's black life doesn't matter because he's killed by black hoodlums who are, breaking into stores and stealing flat screens during the riots. So a black security guard, former cop, his life doesn't matter. If it's the lives of black babies or a black woman having an abortion in Gosnell's clinic, quote unquote, in our society, their black lives don't matter.
No, nobody. I mean, I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. When I was doing the publicity for the book way back, and I remember I was in Fox News and I was going to be on Bill O'Reilly. That'll tell you how long ago it was. And I was kind of nervous, and I was sitting in the green room, and Juan Williams was there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" Kind of not. He was just chatting, and I said, "Oh, I've written this book," and he said, "Oh, we know all about that. We know all about that, right?" And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Do you know who Samika Shaw is?" And he didn't answer, right? And I said, and it was actually, my mother used to talk about the hand of God. It was literally the hand of God, because it really clarified for me exactly why I was there. And he said, no. And I said, well, that's exactly why I wrote the book. I said, because she was a young African-American mother who died as a result of Gosnell. And you don't know who she is, but you know who Michael Brown was. And Michael Brown was a thug. I mean, I'm not happy that he's dead, but he was a thug who assaulted a police officer and died for his trouble. Samika Shaw, it was a mother, and died, and yet no one's talking about her. Like, she's not getting any. They're actually going to put like a statue up for Michael Brown. And I'm thinking, where's the statue for Samika Shaw? Also, where are the statues for the children, for all these children that died in that clinic? And those children, by the way, in the main were African American. Most of those children were minority children, and no one's crying for them. Well, I am actually. I mean, I think it definitely broke my heart. And to see, as I said, the photographs, and to realize all these lives lost, it's beyond belief, really.
Yeah, and it's very interesting and very scary when the mask comes off of what the left really is and what it wants. And so, on this particular issue, there was a time where, and we know that this is a very complicated issue. We know that there's a lot of tragedy here, and personal tragedy. And, we're not going to be necessarily so judgmental towards many young mothers that are caught in difficult situations, and perhaps all those difficult circumstances of health of the mother, or rape or incest. We got all of that. But when this agenda masks itself with concern for women, And lately, it almost seems like the demons are being released from the pits of hell in these last few years, because after Roe v. Wade especially, in these protests, when you just see them screaming and yelling about killing babies, and I've had a few very unpleasant exchanges with some of these feminist pro-abortion individuals, and one of them was just yelling at me in the recent past that she would eat a fetus in a soup with a spoon, and she's just screaming at me. And there's something that's changed a bit. They're not really even hiding. They're not hiding their thirst for child sacrifice.
No, it's different. You're right. It's very, very different. I mean, we're not, remember safe, legal, and rare, right? That was the thing. And people, that was almost something people could kind of almost basically everyone kind of nearly agree with. Obviously pro-lifers wouldn't, but there was something in that phrase that told you this isn't a good thing. This is something that at least should be rare, right? So you were getting some of that out of that. That's gone. As you say, those women you've met, and I've met them, and I have a very good friend in Dublin, and during the referendum in Dublin, she's a lady in her 70s, a lovely person, and she said she would never forgive herself if she wouldn't go door to door, and she thought, you know what, I'll just go door to door, and she's just a lady now, and she got spat at. Somebody spat at her. What's that about? And then when you see, for example, when the referendum passed in Ireland, unfortunately, the first country on the planet Earth that voted for abortion, they danced, they drank champagne. And that's a massive departure from safe, legal, and rare. And you're seeing now in many places, and Canada obviously is exactly the same, where there is abortion up till 9 months. I mean, I think that isn't emphasized enough. I think a lot of times people don't know that that's what the law is, but that is what the law is in Canada. That's what the law is in I think 7 states in the United States right now, up to 9 months for any reason. There's something really awful has happened. Something very disturbing has happened. And I think, I'm hoping that what I achieve from this podcast is that people would think again. And it's interesting, we chose to do this format, this true crime format, because millennials, young people, listen to these true crime podcasts. I listen to a lot of them myself, like Dr. Death and Dirty John. They're very, highly produced, exactly like our own. And we thought, those people who are listening to this is a true crime story. This did happen, but it also brings up the thorny issue of abortion and maybe informs people who aren't open to being informed about the realities.
And Anne, and the realities you have brought to light, and that trial brought to light. A lot of people watching your podcast did not know. Even the jury in that trial did not know what was actually legal and illegal. It's incredible what's actually legal in America about killing an unborn baby.
And to that point, the 2 women ADAs in this case, Christine Wexler and Joanne Pescatore, those 2 women, highly educated, both of them mothers, these are very sophisticated women. They did not know the law, the abortion laws in Pennsylvania when they got this case. And these are not ill-informed. These are very informed people. And it'll tell you a lot about how effective the abortion industry has been in hiding the truth about their industry. I have friends who are doctors who were shocked when they watched the movie and basically said, my God, that's what you do when you're putting a dog down, that when you're doing it legally, when you're, injecting poison into the heart of a living baby. I mean, it's beyond belief. And then pulling the baby out in parts.
Well, Anne, I'm sorry to interrupt. They even have a term, as you showed, when the live baby is born, if they don't snip the neck, there's a term they use just for putting it somewhere in a closet where it can be warm and nice and kind of just die on its own.
Correct. Comfort care.
Comfort care, and that's the word they use for just letting the baby die.
And that was described by the legal abortion doctor on the stand, under oath, under pain of perjury, in the court in Pennsylvania. And then, funny enough, interestingly enough, not long after that, we got to hear Governor Northam of Virginia say the very same thing, describe the very same thing. And I've even heard myself, I've heard of women who delivered, Down syndrome babies and were told, we could leave this baby, and just, it'll pass, So basically dehydrate and starve the baby to death. This is the craziness. This is you talked about child sacrifice. That sounds about right.
And where you make a difference is, we get there's people that are angry at you. We get that there's people supporting you. But you've actually had quite a few pro-abortion people who have watched your film and your series that changed their mind and wrote you.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, an unbelievable number of stories. I've actually contemplated writing a book about the stories. I mean, one of them, well, there's a bunch of them, so I'll tell one anyway. A bunch of women, who were moms in the Central Valley here in California, went to see the movie, kind of, they were, like a girls group, not like even nothing religious or anything like that, like a girls group, and they all went to see the movie. And then they came, and their babies were being taken care of by somebody or whatever. They came out and they were so upset and they didn't know what to do with themselves, and they went home and got their babies and said they would meet at the Planned Parenthood in Fresno. And they did. They met at the abortion clinic that was there, and they just stood outside. They didn't even know what to do. They just stood outside with their babies. And a woman who was going in for an abortion, a young woman, was overcome when she saw them and said, "Can I hold one of your babies?" And they said, "Totally." And they started talking to her and just chatting to her. And they weren't activists, they weren't anything. And she changed her mind, and they kind of adopted her. They fostered this woman in a way, and they said, "Look, we'll help you out. We've got loads of baby clothes." And that baby lived. And, one of the things they say, the Jews say this, if you save one life, you save the whole world. And I think that's, I love that. I love that line. And we know about that one. I have another one, which is another extraordinary one. When the movie came out first, I was a guy got in touch with me, and I'm quite friendly with him now anyway, but he was in Afghanistan. He was serving in Afghanistan, and he said, "Look, I'd love to get the movie." And I said, and I wrote to him, and I said, "And you will." And I made sure he got it, and he showed it to his unit. And there was a guy in the unit whose girlfriend back home was pregnant at the time, and they were talking about having an abortion, and they changed their mind because of that.
Wow.
And we've had people on Twitter even wrote about changing their mind. And then people, and I know people myself, that I showed the movie to, who said, "I have changed my mind. 90 minutes and I'm a different person." There was a young woman, one of these influencers who went to university in Florida, and she wrote a blog post and said, 90 minutes has changed my life. This is unconscionable. You cannot, abortion is wrong always. Yeah, just like that. So that's the power of telling this story. And so I'm going to keep on telling it. It's just telling the truth. It's only telling the truth. Let people listen to this story and see how your heart is not broken over and over when you hear this story.
Well, amen that you have changed and continue to change so many minds on this and matter of life and death, because a lot of these people are keeping their babies. And let's just focus in on this nut job or murder, or however we can describe him. You've sat with this guy. I was very fascinated with how you described this individual. And so, they use, they like to throw the dust into the eyes. It seems that he's also obviously, among many other things, sociopathic, but he talks about his poetry and this and that and tries to move away from the subject constantly. And you've talked about how you're not a fool by any means, and so you show him that you know certain things, and when you've narrowed in and showed him that you know certain facts and asked him, he would become quiet and mumble, "Oh, you know about this." And then he'd say, "Well, I'm too smart to explain this to you. You're not smart enough to have this explained to you."
You're not a scientist. You wouldn't understand this. You're not a medical person. You're not a scientist. You really couldn't, I can't possibly explain this to you. But he would say exactly, he would do that. "Oh, you know about that." And funny enough, when he started doing that, he did it a number of times when I was in the prison. It reminded me that Detective Jim Wood, had the very same experience the very first night he met him at the clinic, when they had divided up the women who worked there and interviewed them separately in different rooms. And then they came back with the information they were getting, and they said, "Why do you manipulate the ultrasound? Why do you pull the transponder or whatever it's called? Why do you pull that away from the woman's stomach? And of course, the reason to do that is to make the baby smaller, so that it appears smaller, so that the date would work for legally or whatever. And he was like, oh, you know about that. He said to Jim, you know. So when he said it to me, I was like, okay, bingo. This is where you're over the target now. And that's what he does. That's his only defense. And that's what he does. Oh, you know about that. And then basically will make some kind of, allusion to the fact that he's far too clever to even break it down and explain it to somebody as ignorant and stupid as myself.
Yeah, these sociopaths and psychopaths and a lot of other descriptions we could use, they have this God complex and they think they're smarter than everybody, right?
Yes.
And they're surprised when they're caught.
Yeah. And he's, the way he talks about himself is extraordinary. You know, he could have been he talks about his poetry. He talks about the piano playing, that I'm such a talented piano player, according to himself. He says, that I could have actually gone professional. When he talks about this stuff and you're thinking, oh my God. And then he talks about his feet. He's got this whole thing about his feet and look at how big my feet are. And then he, in the middle of the interview, he did this thing where he went like this, like, I'm going to put it like this up to my face, like his hand up to my face. And I'm thinking, what's going on now? And I almost thought he was doing the thing from Star Trek, live long and prosper. But actually what he was doing was to show me how big his hands were. And he wanted to shake hands all the time. He shook hands when he walked in, shook hands when we left. And I thought, those hands, when you think what those hands have done in this world, frightening, extraordinary, just extraordinary. But it's comforting to think that at least he'll never be free again. He'll never hurt another child again. He'll never hurt another woman again. But the problem is that this is going on all over the place. And
he tried to flirt with you as well?
Yes. And that's kind of one of his things. Like, he touched my leg repeatedly. I thought we'd be behind a plexiglass, but we weren't. We were in a kind of an open area, and the other convicts were there as well. And he kept touching my leg and saying, oh, I'm sorry. But he was very conscious, and I knew he knew what he was doing. He's highly manipulative. That's how he got people to do what he got them to do. And we know that from interviewing the people who work there, that this is what he's like. And we know also during the trial, like he flirted with the stenographer during the trial. Like, I remember him saying, he sort of said to her, oh, you were wearing a nice blouse, this kind of stuff. And he literally, and we'd heard from Jim as well, that I think when he was being transported back and forth to the jail, he'd be sort of flirting with any women guards that were around. And we know that he, had a girlfriend on staff, supposedly some kind of social worker who had no qualifications of any kind and was getting paid by the hour and never turned up to the place. So she was getting paid for other services, as you can imagine. And there was pornography. He had a lot of pornography. Another weird thing he did was he took photographs of the women when they were sedated. He took of their private areas and would look at those photographs and would share those photographs with Jimmy Johnson, the janitor.
In terms, I'm just trying to digest all this. In terms of his feet, and then there's parts of baby feet in jars in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
So he's got this thing with feet. He had this thing with feet.
And what's really awful about that as well is that when we talked to him, he started talking about his travels. Then he'd been asked to speak at a conference in Poland, and then he was wandering and talking. And of course, he talks a lot. Oh, when I went to Auschwitz, and he said he went to Auschwitz, and he used a word to describe Auschwitz that I've never ever heard anyone ever use before, and that word was impressive. And he thought Auschwitz was very impressive. And what was really impressive was the monument, if you like, of where they have all the little children's shoes of the children who were murdered, all their shoes, like, so thousands of shoes, of little people's shoes. And this really impressed him. He said it was very impressive. And it's breathtaking, because then you're thinking, this is the guy who cut the feet off children and stored them and kept them for whatever nefarious reason we don't even know.
See, Anne, where these people lose in the end, often, and maybe not often enough, but I've always been fascinated, like, when they think that they're gods and how smart they are, but they have these black spots, blind spots, and they don't see what humans see. So, for instance, Ted Bundy and other serial killers, when you study when they ended up getting caught, many of them were shocked that family members had inquired about their family members, because they don't think like us. They thought they're going to get away with everything, and then they don't understand that a mother missed her daughter and inquired why she disappeared. They didn't think that that would happen. And so somebody like Gosnell comes in, oh, there's a whole bunch of cops around and there's all these dead babies' bodies laying around. But obviously they don't care about that. Hey, can you guys just wait till I feed my turtles? They think that they're brilliant, but they're missing something. And that's how they ultimately get caught, because there's some kind of a blind spot there and tremendous inhumanity which they project onto everybody else, right?
Yeah, but it's actually, you know, what's really awful, I think, is that it was a complete accident that he was caught.
Yeah.
The only reason he was caught was because of the drugs. And that's very scary, because, you know, every kind of red flag had been put up. Everyone had complained. As I said, 2 women died. There was an enormous number of complaints. You know, the 2 women died, and no one who worked at the Department of Health thought it was worth their while to get up their backsides and go and walk across the threshold of the clinic. And they didn't do that for 17 years. 17 years he was left unmolested by the authorities and got to do whatever he liked. I mean, of course he thought he was God. He was being treated like he was a God. Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, for me, and I think this is kind of my message to people, you know, going forward, this is the really scary bit, because, you know, that's how much he was protected. He was protected by doctors, by nurses, by people very high up, people in the Department of Health and Department of State. They were protecting him. And they may not like me saying that, but that's exactly what they did. They protected him because they didn't react to all of these complaints. And these are the same people, by the way, who close down restaurants because they find some dust.
Yeah. And in these stories of darkness, there's always stories of light. And you talk about a certain young girl that's tattooed on her wrist, Baby A, in memory. Can you tell us about that?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, by the way, there's a lot of stories of light that came to me through doing this story, and that's why I'm still here as well, and including, by the way, Detective Jim Wood, who is just my soulmate and brother forever. But yeah, I mean, we got all these, we got mail from all kinds of places, and then just one day on Instagram, I was tagged by a girl, and she had tattooed onto her wrist A. And she said, because she never wanted to forget baby boy A, and that she wanted to always remember him and think about him, so that he wouldn't be alone, you know, that she would always remember him. And, you know, she tattooed herself. I thought when you were saying that introduction to that question, I thought you were actually another amazing story, which I think I would like to tell now, because it is a story of light, is during the grand jury. So a lot of witnesses came in during the grand jury phase of this investigation, which went on for nearly a year. So you had all these regular folk who attended that the grand jury, and who heard the worst things you've ever heard in your life. You can imagine, day after day after day, weeks, months passed, and they heard this stuff. And then one day there was a witness, and I think it was Christine Wexler who questioned her and said, so you were having an abortion in this place. So what happened? And she said, well, you know, I was very pregnant, and it was a 3-day procedure. She went in, he put in the things to make her dilate the first day. And for some reason, she started to kind of become really conscious of the fact that she was very pregnant. And she said, what happens to the babies afterwards? And he said, oh, we burn them. So she went home that night. That was the way it was done. She would go home that night, come back the next day for more of the cytotech. She went home, talked to her cousin, and became very disturbed by the whole thing. And Christine Wexler said to her, you know, well, what happened? And she said, oh, don't you know, my baby started kindergarten today. And the grand jury, for the first time in anyone's memory, stood up and applauded, because it was the first good thing that they'd heard. And I always call that story the one that got away, because she just changed her mind. She went to the hospital. They were able to reverse what had started. And she gave birth to a perfect baby who is now, you know, in school. And another really weird thing that happened, the woman that we had playing that role in the movie, she kind of, it's kind of a long story, but basically the director had found her in an IHOP, and he had found her in this IHOP, and she was just a regular person. She was just a waitress. And he said, look, I'd love you to be in this movie. And she was in the movie, a couple of days. And the second day she was there, I had got kind of pally with her. I was chatting to her. And the second day she came to act, she was doing the scene in the grand jury, and she was playing the role of that girl who changed her mind. And she came up to me before the thing started and said, oh my God, this is my story. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I was having an abortion in Houston, and the nurse came in and said to me, hey, listen, I've got to go and do something out the back, but I'll come back. But listen, in the meantime, why don't you listen to your baby's heartbeat? And she listened, and she was like, so she got to put her clothes on, and she just got out there and got into the car with her grandfather. And she said to me, and I interviewed her, and she told the story. We have it. I mean, it's up on YouTube. And she said, I can't believe that I was going to destroy a whole generation of me. And she said, at night, I lie awake and I watch him sleep. And I can't believe I could have destroyed something so perfect. And it was.
Anne, thank you so much for that. But there was a few cases where somebody in Gosnell's clinic tried to change their mind, but he didn't let them out.
That's correct. That is correct. That happened a lot. And he would also, for example, in the case of Carnamaya Monger. Now, I don't know if Carnamaya Monger had changed her mind, but she started to put up a fuss when she was there. And they phoned, the people who were working there phoned Gosnell. He wasn't even there at the time. And he said, mad her up. So they knocked her out. So she had lost all ability. And we know that young people went there, dragged there by relatives who were forcing them to have an abortion. And that's obviously illegal. And they would say, I don't want to be here. And he'd say, it's too late. I've already given you something. The baby's dead. Because
he liked to kill, and also the money. The money. It's combination, money, and they like to kill. And may I ask you, it's difficult not to see a spiritual war here. May I ask you a little bit about your faith, or how you kind of got through this, and what your perspective is spiritually on this matter?
Yeah, well, I would say I was in a bit of a spiritual desert before this started. I was brought up Catholic, but I wouldn't have been the best Catholic ever. And I have to say that when I was writing the book, I particularly remember one particular moment. I've written about it and I've spoken about it many times. And I was in Southern California with a beautiful blue sky, and I'm married to a fabulous man, and my life is fabulous, and in every kind of possible way. And I'm dealing with this, going through this evidence. And I had all of the pictures of what they discovered in the clinic, and the pictures of the babies that they had brought to the medical examiner's office. And I became overcome with a sense of evil, with the evil of what I was dealing with. And I became like frightened, like sitting middle of the day, beautiful sunshine. I became so frightened, and I didn't know what to do. And I knelt down beside the computer and started praying. And I really haven't stopped since, because I think evil quite often for people, and maybe it's a good thing, is theoretical. But when it's real, and when you meet it in a real way, it chills you, it's visceral, it affects you physically. And I know that when we worked on this film and this book and all of this thing where we're done, particularly with the movie, I remember everyone got sick, people puked, everyone cried, like people vomited. I mean, I did a narration of the book, and the woman who was recording it, the producer, would say to me, can we stop? Can you just stop for a minute? I think I'm going to throw up here. And she was pro-abortion and changed her mind through listening to the book for a week.
Well, let's end on that note, because our time is up. I wish we had another couple hours, but let's end on the light in terms of the lives that have been saved, the lives that you saved, the people that you've touched through this series, the people who have changed their minds. And we love you at the Glazov Gang. We wish you all the strength and perseverance to continue getting all the truth out about everything. Everybody should go to serialkillerpod.com, right?
And do something else for me. Go to serialkillerpod.com. And if you have an iPhone, go to the podcast app on the iPhone and go to Serial Killer, a true crime podcast. And you'll find us, the Gosnell story. And what's happened is, what's very interesting, you'll find this fascinating. we have a lot of reviewers, people are giving us 5 stars and all of that. But then the people who actually we really did want to get to, the people who are pro-abortion, have listened. And what's really funny, kind of in a way, is they've listened to 6 episodes and then they've realized what they've learned, and they're really, really angry. And so they're giving 1 star and they're writing, I listened to 6 episodes. This is a terrible podcast. And it's like, no, you wouldn't listen to 6 episodes if it was a terrible podcast. But what they're angry at by what they've learned, and they won't unlearn it, and they can't unlearn it. So I need your audience to go give us 5 stars, please. Listen to the podcast, but most important, share it with the young person in your life who needs to hear this.
So serialkillerpod.com, watch the series, give it 5 stars, and share it with everybody, especially with young people.
Please, please. And it's all audio. It's all just audio. You can listen to it in the car, but share it as well. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Okay.
And thank you so much for joining the Glazov Gang. Wish you all the strength and perseverance. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. serialkillerpod.com. Go watch the 6-part episode series on serial killer Kermit Gosnell. See you soon. Good night. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I recently got one of Mike Lindell's pillows and comforters at mybillow.com, and I started getting some of the most restful sleeps in my life. And you can do the same. Go to mypillow.com and use code GG21 to get incredible and amazing discounts. Or just call 1-800-854-0673. While you're doing that, you'll know that you're supporting Mike Lindell, a true American hero fighting a true American cause. And you'll also be supporting the Glazov Gang. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God bless America.